Hello and welcome to Business Talk, brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. I'm Britt Scarce with Emory Federal Credit Union. Today we have Karl Ulrich with Sebaly, Shillito Dyer, along with Pandy Pridemore from the Human Resource USA here in studio, and we're going to be talking about transgender issues in the workplace. Karl, Pandy, welcome.
Hello, Britt. How are you?
Britt. Doing good.
Good.
So I'm an employer, and I have someone that comes to me and they tell me that they are transgender, and what kind of things should I be concerned with?
Well, you've got a number of considerations right off the bat. So let me start by talking a little bit about where we are in the law. It's changing on almost a weekly basis. In fact, very recently we saw some activity from the Department of Justice pulling back on some of the Obama-era pronouncements on the treatment of Title VII in this area. We also know that the EEOC has a very different view than the Department of Justice has. So it's a very confusing area. The courts are all over the map on this area. Does Title VII, do the civil rights laws prohibit discrimination on the basis of transgender rights? And that rule is unsettled in the courts right now. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the law. Part of what you have to do is you have to make a judgment and take some risk. But my counsel is usually to be take the conservative approach, try to comply with the most rigid requirements, and move from there.
So if this issue comes up, at my business, should I make sure, Pandy, that I get some legal representation right away to make sure that I'm doing, taking the proper steps, that I'm being sensitive to everyone's needs around this issue?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we wanted the topic for this month to be on transgender issues. Karl and I are both getting more and more questions on this topic, and it's more prevalent than the average business person actually understands. So because our emphasis for any of our clients is to always maintain a safe and secure workplace, and to approach things as compliant as possible, we really felt that our viewers needed to kind of really think about the scenario in a proactive manner. Whether it's happening to you or not, understand the implications of what could happen if it goes wrong, or if it's not based on, as Karl and I say, do not go into denial on this. It is an uncomfortable topic. And we're even going to start with definitions so that people understand exactly where we're going with this and how the laws are looking at individuals who are making these choices and bringing these topics to the employment setting. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because this is not going to go away. This is not going to go away. So, and you have multiple government agencies who are coming in and voicing. I mean, OSHA's even coming in and has been voicing in on this. So you've got 4 and 5 different organizations from the government coming in and giving us different perspectives. So to answer your question, absolutely. This is a topic of all the different HR issues that are going on right now in the workplace and involving labor laws. This is the one that you want to get legal counsel on very, very quickly. So we hope at the end of this show, you're going to have a little bit more of an idea on what the warning signs are and how important it is to get your management team trained to know what to look for, trained to know what to hear, what may be going on that they just are kind of overlooking right now.
I know we've heard in the news a lot, Karl, with, like North Carolina was kind of like one of the first big, stories where this became a big issue as to which bathroom someone could use based on, which way they identify. What kind of issues, or how would an employer, kind of deal with that? How should we deal with that?
Well, let's start with the EEOC's current position. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, of course, is the federal agency responsible for helping to enforce the non-discrimination in employment laws. And the EEOC's position right now is that discrimination on the basis of gender preference is discrimination on the basis of sex. So it violates Title VII, which means that those who are involved in who have a process they're undergoing transition, gender transition, or those who may be of one biological gender and may identify with the other gender, those individuals are protected right now under Title VII, according to the EEOC. So how do you deal with that? If somebody comes to you who is biologically male and says, well, I'm now identifying more as a female, I'd like to use the female restroom, how do you deal with that? Well, the EEOC says you have to allow that individual to use the bathroom that corresponds with their gender of choice, with their gender of identity, not necessarily with their gender of birth. So it's the choice of the individual that carries the day. That may be a very different rule than the one that the Department of Justice is pursuing right now in several court cases. But you are seeing a difference there. I think from an employment standpoint, the cautious approach is always the best approach. I would consider adopting a non-discrimination policy across the board, being as sensitive as you can be to those issues, whether you agree with the EEOC's position or not. But I do think you have to be aware of it and consider that an issue for compliance purposes. You have to definitely consider that approach. Then the question is, when you have somebody who expresses that kind of a concern, you are also going to have individuals potentially who have the opposite view in the workplace. I'm uncomfortable with that individual using the women's restroom. What am I to do about that? What do you do for
the other employees, right, that are impacted by this?
Right, and that really is a concern. And I think part of what maybe Pandy can speak to is how you talk to those folks about this issue. How do you? A lot of it has to do with education and sensitivity type conversations about sensitivity in the workplace. But it is a concern. It is a difficult thing for adjustment for either side, really, of that debate. And I think as Pandy says, putting it under the rug, sweeping it under the rug is absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely cannot do that. So Pandy, is training a vital,
oh my gosh,
thing that needs to happen in this situation?
And sooner than later, because I'm getting these situations arising. I've got a daycare that's got, they're dealing with it. I've got a manufacturing firm that's dealing with it. There is no set demographic, and when you talk about individuals who are switching identities, we're talking about both transsexuals as well as transgenders. And the more training we can provide to that frontline supervisor who sees the employee on a regular basis versus the employer who may not see the individual on a regular basis, that's when we can be more proactive. Okay. And we have to remember, stay focused. Stay focused. Hire people for all the right reasons. Stay focused on what you want the individual to do and what is needed for the needs of the business to be met. If we can stay focused on that and keep everyone's conversation and their interest and activities around that, we can get rid of all the other things that stack on top of the discrimination part, the bullying, the ostracizing.
Does it become a really distraction?
Oh,
I mean,
my goodness.
For a lot of these companies that they are, really struggle with, how do I run my business the way I need to run it? And
yes.
I have this,
Well, I had one whole line of a manufacturing location just stop because nobody wanted to stand next to the individual, nobody wanted to work with the individual, nobody wanted to go into the bathroom with the individual. I mean, it was ridiculous. So this stuff can escalate so quickly. And if there had been more education with the frontline individuals who could identify this very, very quickly, they wouldn't have lost as much time in production. But and then it goes on to social media, and I mean, it just stacks and stacks and stacks. So absolutely train quickly. Yeah. And if legal counsel, if you've got a really good legal counsel that has a training program, use it, apply it. If not, find one.
Well, this could result in being sued, right, for harassment if you're not handling it properly.
No question about it. One of the risk factors from a harassment standpoint is you have somebody who is transitioning or identifying with the other gender, and they prefer to be referred to as a he instead of a she, or vice versa. And the workers in the workplace, the co-workers, refuse to adopt that approach, and for whatever reason, push back on that. That kind of a dynamic, that kind of stress and tension in the workplace can create a harassment risk. So part of the training has to deal with how you use the right terminology when you're dealing with someone who's going through gender reassignment, for example, or who has a biological gender and but identifies with the other gender and is going through that process of transition. So you do have to be sensitive to how you talk, how you deal with those individuals on a day-to-day basis. That's a very complicated process, and it does need some tender loving care, so to speak. The other thing I will say too is that there is a law called the Americans with Disabilities Act, and one of the things we're seeing in the law right now is that something called when somebody is undergoing gender transition, they could be deemed to be disabled from a medical standpoint, and therefore subject to certain accommodations in the workplace under a pre-existing law long before the EEOC took this interpretation of Title VII. The Americans with Disabilities Act may provide them with additional protections. So again, we need to understand exactly the situation that the individual is going through to really understand the legal obligations of the employer, and that involves dealing with the issue head on.
Now, Pandy, what do we do for the other employees that are uncomfortable? Are there potential, lawsuits or any issues that perhaps we could be sued as an employer because, do they have certain rights or anything that we need to be concerned with when we're trying to also be accommodating to the person that's going through the transition?
Well, we really have to hope that every employer that's watching the show has a anti-harassment policy. Number one, that needs to be in place, and if you don't, then put it in place. And I'm not talking just sexual harassment. I'm talking about bullying. I'm talking about just overall disrespectful type behavior in the workplace, and quite frankly, that even involves the National Labor Relations Board and their definition of what that type of behavior is. So again, legal counsel if you don't have the policy, because that's going to be a little hard to implement if you don't truly understand that. And then the other issue too is just helping that first line supervisor to understand that they could be held personally liable if they see this going on and don't let the company take that active role in trying to prevent it. They will hold as much of a responsibility for leaving that individual as a victim. So, and the other thing too is if you've got a leadership team that is positive and confident and is approaching this head on, proactively, then everyone else feels confident to follow. And they won't be scared and confused.
Well, if you just focus on them, if that individual does their job well. I mean, if they're there, they're doing their job well, really whether or not they are identifying, as this gender or that gender, if that really has no impact on the job that they're doing. And like you said, if the management handles it properly and makes sure that there aren't, makes whatever accommodations, I mean, I don't know, do they have to provide a special bathroom or do they have to allow them to use whichever bathroom they want? And if anyone else has an issue with that, it's just there's nothing that can be done?
And they have to, according to the EEOC, again, we're talking about the EEOC's directives and guidance now, the employer is required to allow the individual to use the bathroom of choice, the bathroom of the gender of their choice, as opposed to forcing them to use the gender of their birth, and that's those bathrooms. So. And you are not allowed to require them to use a separate facility. You have to be giving them the same equal access as anyone else. So that's very clear. Now, again, we don't know where this law will go. The courts, the United States Supreme Court hasn't yet weighed in on this issue. So we have certain federal circuits going in one direction, other federal circuits going in the other direction. We will at some point get some clear guidance from the United States Supreme Court, but that's several years down the road. In the meantime, I think the cautious approach, the compliant approach is the way to approach this issue, and as I think you would with any uncomfortable cultural issues in the workplace, you have to deal with it and all the concerns that are raised head on.
Right. Well, and I want employers to really think about this hard now, because what we're reading and seeing now is that that generation between 7 and 13 are starting to embrace not transgender but pansexual. They're even going beyond transsexual. They're going pansexual, which means they don't identify with anything. Mm-hmm. Zip, nothing. They are. It's a whole different group, and those individuals will be coming into the workforce here within the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. So if we can't embrace and deal with this issue, we're not going to be able to deal with that one. And I also want to remind employers that this is not whether they agree or disagree with this. That is a personal issue. We need to stay professional as we approach these topics, get professional assistance with people who are prepared to help them overcome some of these issues and questions. And let's take care of everybody. Just stay to work.
Karl, Pandy, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about this. It's a very sensitive issue, but it is, like you said, something that is absolutely employers are dealing with, and they've got to be able to make sure that they handle it properly. And I think this was great today that you come in and give us this guidance.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being here. You've been watching Business Talk. Till next time, I'm Britt Scarce.